Hello and welcome to Becoming Home. When it gets warmer and spring is in the air, I get a little homesick. In Zimbabwe, I always knew spring had arrived when our lemon trees started blooming, filling the air with the most wonderful sweet fragrance. There's nothing quite like the smell of lemon blossoms. So as spring arrived in Texas, I went a little lemon crazy. I bought 2 new sets of lemon pajamas, I purchased a lemon recipe tin with matching recipe cards, and now I'm excited to share this delicious, light lemon citrus cake with you. First, grate the zest of 2 lemons. We'll be putting zest in both the cake and the filling. Make sure you keep rotating the lemon so that you don't get too much of the white rind, which can be bitter. You want the gorgeous bright flavor of the yellow peel. The original recipe called for both orange and lemon zest, but we didn't have orange trees in our orchard when I first made this cake, so we adapted the recipe for only lemon. Since that time as a teenager in Zimbabwe, I have never made this cake with the orange peel and juice. I therefore changed the name from yellow citrus cake to lemon citrus cake. It may be a little redundant, but it encapsulates this cake perfectly. Next, juice both of the lemons and set both the zest and the juice aside for later. In a bowl, mix together 2 cups of flour, 2½ teaspoons of baking powder, and 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. Whisk together till combined. Set aside. You can of course just use a spoon, but as I don't usually sift my flour, I like to use a whisk to break up and lighten up the flour mixture. Next, grease and flour 2 8-inch round cake pans. I start by using the stick of butter to coat the pan, then use my fingers to ensure full, even coverage. Toss a little flour in one pan, then tilt, rotate, and thump the side until the flour is distributed around the bottom and the sides of the pan. I use the other pan to catch any bits of flour that fall out and repeat the process. Any excess flour after that goes back into my flour container. At this point, you also want to start preheating your oven. Set it to 350 degrees Fahrenheit or 180 degrees Celsius. In your mixing bowl, beat 2/3 of a cup of softened butter for about 30 seconds. I was lucky enough to get a stand mixer for Christmas, but up until then I did all my baking with a $30 hand mixer from Walmart. It's definitely possible to make this cake with a hand mixer, but you may need another set of hands for the icing, and you'll see why later. Once the butter is broken down, add 1½ cups of sugar and 1½ teaspoons of the zest into the bowl. Cream this together until the mixture is combined. Next, we're going to add 3 eggs, one at a time, and beat well after each. If possible, I always like to take my eggs out of the refrigerator and bring them to room temperature before baking with them. I think it makes it easier to incorporate them into my cake mixtures. This step is particularly important when you're whipping up egg whites. If you didn't have time to take your eggs out of the fridge beforehand, a quick way to warm them up is to put them in a bowl of slightly warm water. Now stir together 2/3 of a cup of milk and 2 tablespoons of the lemon juice. The acid from the lemon juice will curdle the milk and make it a thick, buttermilk-like consistency. Now we're going to add our flour mixture and our milk mixture to the cream, butter, sugar, and eggs. But we're only going to add a little bit at a time, and we're going to alternate between the wet and dry ingredients. The way I do this is just keep the mixer on at a medium speed and carefully add my ingredients at the side. Once everything is added, I will stop the mixer and scrape around the bowl to get all the flour stuck to the sides. I will then turn it back on just to get that last bit of flour fully combined. Distribute your cake batter into your already prepared, greased and floured pans. Try to get the amounts as even as possible so that your cakes bake at the same rate and rise to the same level. Spread out the mixture and make the surface fairly even. Because cakes tend to rise in the middle, but I want a flat layer, I make a shallow little basin in the middle. I couldn't tell you for sure if this works, but at least in my mind I've done what I can to combat the big dome center. Place your cakes into your preheated oven for about 30 minutes. While your cakes are baking, you can work on the lemon filling that we're going to spread between the layers of the cake. In a saucepan, combine 3/4 of a cup of sugar, 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, and 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt. Stir or whisk in 2/3 of a cup of cold water, 2 beaten egg yolks, 1 teaspoon of the zest, and 4 tablespoons of lemon juice. The original recipe only calls for 3, but I love lemon cakes and lemon flavor, so I'm always going to add more lemon juice. Cook and stir this mixture over medium to high heat until the sauce has thickened and is bubbly. After you've reached the bubble point, cook and stir 1 minute longer. Remove the sauce from the heat, then throw in 1 tablespoon of butter. You'll know the cakes are baked when you poke the center with a toothpick and it comes out clean. They'll also be golden brown and start smelling really good. Cool your cakes in a wire rack for about 10 minutes before removing them from their pans. I always hate the dreadful anticipation of wondering whether they've stuck to the bottom or not. This filling now needs to be cooled. One way I speed up the process is by removing it from the hot pan and going ahead and dividing it into 3 equal portions. Our cake will be 4 layers, so 3 of those layers will need filling in between them. Once your filling is divided into 3 bowls, cover it with wax paper, yes, right on top of the filling. This is so that it doesn't form a crust, and put the bowls in the fridge. Leave your cakes on the wire rack to cool completely before you start assembling everything. To make the icing, we're going to start by making a syrup. In a small saucepan, combine 1 cup of sugar, 1/4 teaspoon cream of tartar, 1/3 cup of water, and 1/8 teaspoon of salt. Cook and stir this mixture until it's bubbly and the sugar has completely dissolved. Now I know we've jumped right into the icing, but you actually don't want to start making it until your cakes are cooled and you're ready to start assembling your layers. This is because it's made up of whipped egg whites. The air trapped in the eggs will start to escape over the next day or so, and your icing will disappear. This happens especially fast if it's particularly warm or humid, so don't make your icing until right before you need it. When the sugar is dissolved, the liquid will be clear, not the cloudy white it started as. But see how frothy the syrup is? This makes it hard to tell whether the syrup is clear or cloudy. You can remove the syrup from the heat, the froth should clear, and you can determine whether the sugar has dissolved or not. Once your syrup is ready, set it aside and start whipping up your room temperature egg whites. If your whites are too cold, they won't whip well, and you won't get the volume and the consistency you need for this icing. To your egg whites, you'll add 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Once the egg whites and the vanilla are combined and the mixture is frothy, you can start adding your syrup. You need to add this very slowly while the mixer is on. This is why you may need additional help if you have a hand mixer. I pour the syrup from the pan in a thin drizzle. You'll start to see the eggs gain volume and turn white and silky smooth. Do not rush adding the syrup. You'll need to whip these eggs for about 7 minutes or until stiff peaks form. Once you've added all the syrup, you can start splitting your 2 cakes into 4 layers while your eggs continue to whip up. If you struggle with cutting straight, like I do, you can use toothpicks as guidelines. I place 8 toothpicks evenly around my cake. Put them right in the middle between the top and the bottom. I used my serrated bread knife to cut through the center of the cake, using the toothpicks as guidelines. Remove the toothpicks and repeat on the other cake. Keep an eye on your egg whites and check them periodically. Here, when I lifted out the whisk attachment, the peak curled over. This is indicative of the soft peak stage. What I want is for the tip to stand up straight and stiff, so I kept whisking until the egg whites reached this stage. Now you're ready to start assembling your cake. Grab your first layer, you want it to be one of the cake bottoms, and put it down on your cake container or cake stand with the cut side up. This will give you a flat, level surface as your base, which will hopefully prevent a leaning, lopsided cake. Roll out enough wax paper to cover your cake container or stand and then cut it into 4 pieces. Place these underneath your cake. This is going to catch any crumbs and also make cleaning up after the icing so much easier. Spread 1 portion of the lemon filling onto your first layer, trying to get it as even as possible and reach all the way to the edges of the cake without spilling over the sides. Add your next layer of cake and repeat the process until you've built up all 4 layers of the cake. Try to be as neat and even as possible to achieve a straight, proportional cake. Next, I'm taking time to brush off any loose crumbs from the top of the cake, as well as any that have fallen onto the wax paper. We don't want any crumbs appearing on the outside of the icing and making it look messy. Since this is a light, airy icing, I'm just using a soft spatula and a knife to apply the icing. Plop a big dollop of icing on the top of the cake and spread it to the edges. Now I'm using my knife to get a thin crumb coat around the sides of the cake. Once the cake is encased in icing, you can start adding more to both the sides and the top. Because the icing is so light, you can put on quite a lot without it overwhelming the cake. I used most of the icing I had made. Not much went to waste. Once you've got the icing on the cake, you can use your knife to move the icing into decorative swirls. What I love about this icing is that it's easy to use for beginners, and you don't need a lot of technique or skill to make the swirls look good. It's just a sort of abstract, airy look, but the striking white icing makes it look stunning. Now you can carefully pull the pieces of wax paper out from underneath the cake. This will leave you with a clean line at the bottom of the cake, and you don't have to spend time wiping up the sticky icing. You definitely want to cut your wax paper into quarters because you will not be able to pull out a single sheet of paper without toppling the cake. The finishing touch is to grate some lemon zest over the top of the cake. I have also used lime zest in the past if I want more of a contrast against the white icing. Well, there you have it, a beautiful tasty cake perfect for a spring tea party or possibly for Mother's Day dessert. To me, the light, delicate lemon flavor makes it perfect for springtime with fresh beginnings and energy in the air. And while we look at these beauty shots, just a note, this cake uses 5 eggs total, 3 for the cake mix itself, then you separate 2 eggs and use the yolks for the filling and the whites for the icing. When I first made this cake as a teenager, I had to ask my mom's permission to use 5 eggs. That was a lot of eggs with the price inflation and food scarcity going on in Zimbabwe. Luckily she said yes, and this recipe has been a family favorite ever since. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video and that it's inspired you to make this delicious cake for yourself or maybe for Mother's Day. To watch another recipe video, click here, or learn how to make marbled eggs by clicking here. I know it's past Easter, but these eggs could definitely be used to decorate your table for a spring tea party or maybe for Mother's Day. As always, be sure to subscribe if you like my content, and I'll see you next Friday.